Hey guys, how you doing? It's Tom. Since the Parkland school shooting, we have seen relentless anti-gun propaganda coming from the corporate mainstream media. And we know it's propaganda because CNN has already been caught censoring students from the high school who are actually pro-Second Amendment because we know they wouldn't allow a free and open debate via free speech to take place. But putting that aside, the whole situation, it really serves as great symbolism because if you look at students that come through government schools, and this isn't an accident, they are an overwhelming majority of students who graduate high school, for example, register with the Democratic Party. They're generally leftist. When people get a little bit more life experience, they're a little better able to, well, if they learn to think for themselves, to see through the lies of government, to see through the lies of media. They tend to become a little bit more conservative, and if people really wake up, they see past the entire Democrat-Republican two-party paradigm and realize that the oligarchs from the top really control society. But what we're seeing with the anti-gun propaganda is really serving as great symbolism because the mainstream media is using students fresh out or still in government schools to push anti-gun propaganda. So the mainstream media is using students coming through government schools to take away the individual liberty of Americans. And you really see the indoctrination because the school shooting took place, and albeit it's traumatic and there's a lot of fear, but these students view what occurred as a failure of government, and not only a failure of government, but a failure of government not to regulate society enough. That government's role should be to protect the American people from the American people. It hasn't occurred to these students that incidents like school shootings might actually occur because the government has taken away so much of our liberty, because we're not free to live our lives the way we want to live. And looking beyond that, these students aren't able to envision solutions outside of the government. It's the line of thinking that goes along, well, really it's twofold. First, they view government as the only solution, and anyone who's against the government intervening. So, for example, if you're against the repeal of the Second Amendment, or if you're against further gun regulations, then these students view you as less than human. They view you as hateful. And we saw this with Dana Loesch, who was the NRA spokeswoman who bravely attended the largely set up CNN town hall. She was there to be attacked. But the vitriol coming at her, I mean, they were basically chanting to kill her, burn her at the stake, because she doesn't want the government to take away Americans' individual liberty, Americans' right to bear arms. So first, the school system teaches to dehumanize those that you disagree with, and second, it teaches the students that government is the only entity that could provide solutions. How could we possibly have a solution to our problems if government doesn't step in? This line of thinking goes something like, those who don't believe in that there should be a big government welfare state want the poor to be homeless and starve to death. They can't possibly imagine any scenario outside of a government welfare state where society could actually be better off, which of course it would. You see, why do I say that? So, say you have someone in poverty, they are a drug addict, so every time they get a job, they get fired because they're high and they don't show up for work on time, whatever it may be. Well, the government solution to that is to just permanently throw money at them, right? Oh, don't worry about it. We'll give you housing. We'll give you food stamps. We don't want you out in the streets. But if you took away the welfare state, the way society used to work, communities used to be closer together. People say, oh, You used to be able to let your child play outside, and now you can't. Well, the welfare state's a big reason for that. See, people used to attend community events. People used to be part of a local church, whatever it may be. And part of the reason for that was there was no fallback, so you had to rely on your fellow man. So when people would hit hard times, for example, maybe there's a drug addict, lost his job, down on his luck, he might go to his local community. He might go to his local church and say, I'm having a hard time. Can you please loan me some money, help me get a job? And maybe that church will say, okay, I'm going to loan you some money and help you get a job. But if this drug use continues, that's going to stop. We're not going to enable the problem. And then they loan him some money, so maybe he could keep his apartment, whatever it might be, and get him a job. And then a couple of months go by and he keeps missing work, and the employers report that, or he gets fired, and he goes back and they say, what happened? And he makes up some story. So they call the employer, say, what happened? They say, he was on drugs, he kept missing work. Well, now the charity is going to say, well, I can't enable this. You're going to have to show that you clean up your act. You come back here, show that you're clean off drugs. Well, then we'll give you money. We'll help you get another job. But until then, we're not going to enable the behavior. Where government will continue to enable the behavior, and it will just compound. And over many years, it will create great problems in society, including children with deadbeat parents, which, one of the greatest predictors of success in life is just having, if you have two stable parents not using drugs, you're much more likely to be successful in this world. So you really see how this type of government welfare program creates a cycle of dependence. But these students can't envision anything outside of what has been presented to them in government schools. And of course, government schools present the argument that government is always the answer, when in reality, government is almost always the problem. In fact, the primary difference between government and the mafia, for example, is that the mafia doesn't have a 15-year indoctrination program masquerading as an education program, convincing the public from the time they're very young that the mafia is actually a good entity there to help the public. The government does have that, and that's why so many young people look to the government to solve our problems. It's why so many young people are completely unable to think for themselves, and only the very few of us who are fortunate enough to maintain our free will and do independent research start to figure this stuff out. So the students in Parkland have been, and they're a microcosm of students all over the country, right? I mean, we see this Berkeley, where they don't even let people with different point of views speak. But the students in Parkland are symbolism for the government indoctrination of young minds and the weaponization of those young minds to get them to promote the removal of their own liberty, the taking away of their own freedom. How many young people want the Second Amendment completely repealed? How many young people in today's society, the safe space culture, would repeal parts of the First Amendment, free speech, because they have been told that certain things are hate speech? Well, in order to have any intellectual society, we have to risk offending each other. Because what they don't understand is saying something's hate speech so that we shouldn't be able to have the conversation, that's offensive to me. But I don't push for their right to say that to be taken away. I try to explain with my speech why declaring anything hate speech, why putting any limitations on free speech is a bad idea. In the Soviet Union, these people were known as useful idiots. People who would fight for the power of the government because they believe that the government was there to protect them, when in reality the government was the very institution that was enslaving them. And again, this situation is really a microcosm because these students would know that if they had the historical background to understand how governments manipulate populations, how governments abuse populations. The mainstream media uses the emotions of children. People are they see children who are injured in school shootings, and they don't want this to happen. So they use the emotion of the situation to garner support in the public to take away our individual liberty. And then, of course, they use the naivete of the students themselves to promote the taking away of our individual liberty. But the truth is, the government doesn't care about children, and the government doesn't care about individual liberty. And neither does the mainstream media, for that matter. Because if the government cared about children, if the mainstream media cared about children, they would talk nonstop about the Common Core system, which by every measure, every statistical framework has been a complete failure. America is producing students who are completely unable to think for themselves, who graduate high school with virtually no skill set. Literacy is horrible in America. Grammar is horrible in America. People are unable to think with logic. They don't even know to define their terms at the onset of any debate. People are unable to write academically, let alone to have actual life skills. Even if that's being an auto mechanic, whatever it might be, where people can make money. Instead, people come through, or young people go through high school, they coast along, they're told when they're 18 years old and have no idea about the world to sign a document, which is criminal, to take on $200,000 worth of debt, to go study in women's study or something along that nature, where they get out of college with $200,000 of debt, no skills, and can't get a job for even $40,000 a year. So if the government and the media cared about young people, this is what they would talk about. If the government and the media cared about young people, they would talk about the problem with drugging any young child who might be too hyperactive in the classroom. Did you ever think that young children might be hyperactive because they're not made biologically, evolutionarily speaking, to sit in a classroom and be lectured to for 8 hours a day? Especially young boys who are meant to be out there and experiencing rough and tumble play? But that doesn't happen. Instead, what happens, anyone who doesn't conform to society is deemed mentally ill, crazy. They have to be drugged. When in reality, they're sane. These young children are sane, but they live in a crazy society. But the government and the mainstream media receive billions and billions of dollars. They're owned by the big pharmaceutical companies. So they don't talk about this problem. Instead, they allow young people to be drugged. And of course, this drugging of young people leads to dependency. It leads to mental illness, the stripping of creativity. This mental illness helps break down culture, which leads to school shootings and mass shootings. In fact, I recently did a parody video titled Generic Antidepressant Symptoms May Include Mass Shootings, which highlighted just how many of the recent mass shootings were on antidepressants. So you see how the government just creates problems. It doesn't care about young people. If the government cared about young people, it wouldn't continuously lie to get America involved in foreign wars. Yeah, the media was so anti-Bush, except when they were promoting his invasion of Iraq, right? Weapons of mass destruction line, the media is all over that. Go to Iraq, let's go to war. Intervention in Syria, the media wants us to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. The American government's currently helping fund Saudi Arabia slaughter thousands of young, innocent people, women, children, men in Yemen. But the mainstream media doesn't even talk about it because they don't want you to be outraged about the military-industrial complex. They don't care about that. They make a lot of money off the military-industrial complex. So if they cared about young people, that's what they would talk about, including young people in other countries who are being slaughtered under lies of American imperialism. And if you don't think it's imperialism, you're just misunderstanding the nature of what's happening, right? You say, oh, America didn't take the oil. Right, it's a corporate government. So the corporations buy the government, the politicians make millions of dollars to go to war, and the corporations make billions of dollars. The American people just get a lot of death and despair. And of course that leads to more mental illness, right? Because people are, all these soldiers, these brave Americans who I always salute, are coming back to America with post-traumatic stress disorder. Again, this is leading to children in unstable homes. Children in unstable homes themselves are much more likely to fall victim to government propaganda, much more likely to fall victim to drugging, much more likely to become school shooters. In fact, a recent study found most of all of the mass shooters in modern America are not raised by their biological fathers. Again, they're promoting mental illness. So they really don't care about people or shootings for that matter, right? They don't care. They're not worried about mass shootings. I mean, if they were worried about young people being shot, right, wouldn't CNN have held a town hall for all of the black-on-black crime taking place in Chicago, right? I mean, the gang violence in Chicago, it's more dangerous to be a young black man, a black teenager on the streets of Chicago than it is to be a soldier in Afghanistan right now. You're more likely to die in the streets of Chicago if you're a young black teen than if you're in Afghanistan. But the mainstream media won't report on that. One, because they don't care, and two, because it goes against their narrative, right? The narrative is that everything's the oppressed versus the oppressor. This is where the cultural Marxism comes in, that it's the police and white people hunting down black people, when in reality, over 90% of black fatalities are from black-on-black gun crime, usually over gang violence. A lot of this is the result of the drug war, which I've spoken about extensively. But if the mainstream media cared about this gun violence, cared about young people, they would certainly be holding town halls about what's going on in Chicago. A place, by the way, with the toughest gun laws in their country. And if you want to know the truth about gun control, I just made a video which I strongly recommend you watch. It's 40 minutes long. It's really detailed. I'm very proud of it. It's called The Truth About Gun Control, where I go over the gun statistics, homicide statistics in America. I provide some historical background, and then what other cultures, England, France, Mexico, Australia, Israel, and Switzerland have done in terms of gun regulations and how that's worked in each country. And what was very fascinating about my findings is that Switzerland, which has some of the least restrictive gun laws in the country, hasn't had a mass shooting since 2001 and has only had, I believe, 120 homicides, gun-related homicides, in the last 10 years. Yet they have the third highest gun ownership in the world, including semi-automatic rifles. So what's going on in Switzerland suggests that America, as I've described in this video, actually has a cultural problem and a mental health problem, not a gun problem. So everything going on is a real microcosm. And you even see one of the students they're putting out front and center, David Hogg, has now threatened not to go back to school until gun laws are, gun legislation is put into place. And again, this is just, it's a microcosm of people not understanding individual choice and individual liberty. David, that's fine. If you don't want to go back to school, don't go back to school. That's what freedom is. You might actually learn something if you spend some time outside of school. Do some historical research on your own, and you'll find out the truth about democide. That on a low estimate, 262 million people were killed by their own governments in just the 20th century alone. So People look to the state to solve their problems, when in reality the state is the cause of most of their problems. And the propaganda being pushed right now is tremendous symbolism for everything that is wrong with government schools and the mainstream media. I really appreciate your support. I like to bring in-depth thought to all of my videos. I put a lot of thought before. I don't just film. I really think about these things before I film. I believe that philosophy is very important, that if we are going to have any chance as a society moving forward, people need to embrace philosophy. You need to start reading Greek philosophers. Listen to people like Stefan Molyneux. You might not agree with him, but it's about the process of thinking itself, not what to think. Read Ayn Rand. Read all of these incredible historical philosophers. Read John Locke and Thomas Paine, because until people learn how to think, which is what philosophy is all about, it's understanding the root causes of issues rather than the symptoms. And that's why I'm able to get, I think those of you who follow me, I would venture to guess that you believe I get pretty in-depth on these issues. I really try to attack the root causes of the problems society faces. And the reason I'm able to do that is because I have embraced philosophy. So we need to do that more as a society. So if you want to spread philosophy and spread my message, please share these links. All of the social media has been very restrictive, but even in spite of that, I've done this for 1 year. I've been so successful. I've reached over 100,000 impressions on my videos, just making videos for over a year. It's really a fascinating thing. So please share this link. Together we could change the world. True revolutions aren't physical. They are intellectual, and that's why I do always promote civil disobedience. I know the one place I do draw the line is if the government ever tries to confiscate the guns. That to me is a declaration of war. But other than that, all societal change, because that would be the initiation of force from government against the American people. But other than that, societal change should be done peacefully through intellect. And if we continue to push for intellectual revolution, we will hopefully get it. Push philosophy, push logic, push reason. So share these links, and if you want to support me financially, because eventually I'm going to get to a breaking point where I make enough money doing this where I'm dedicated. I will get out 1 video a day. If I can, I'll get out 2, 3 videos a day. I believe I could change the world. And if you're going to change the world, that starts with believing you can. So if you want to support me, go to www.patreon.com/FFRnews for as little as $1 monthly. It makes a big difference for me. It could really help me. My videos have been lagging. I don't have the finances to do a lot of great tech things right now. But for as little as $1 a month, you could really help me with that cause. I really appreciate it. If you wanted to follow me on my other social media accounts, please make a Steemit account. I've been blogging. I've been writing a lot there, something I'm very passionate about. You can help share those articles and also meet many other bloggers who are doing really great things on that platform. It's much more positive than anything you get on Facebook or anything like that. I am on Facebook, Tom Anderson. I am TomFFRnews. I'm FFRnews on Facebook. I am TomFFRnews on Twitter. Tom Anderson on Gab. TomFFRnews on Minds. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll get back to you soon. All right. Thanks, guys.